And we begin this hour with breaking news out of the White House. President Trump is fully and rapidly pulling U.S. troops from Syria. According to a defense official close to the administration, President Trump made the decision yesterday. The full extent of the plan is yet to be announced, but right now we're hearing it'll affect about 2,000 or so U.S. forces. RT correspondent Dan Cohen is live for us outside of the White House with more details. Dan?
That's right, Manila. Around 10 this morning, President Trump all but confirmed the reports that the United States would be withdrawing its troops from Syria. He wrote on Twitter, "We have defeated ISIS in Syria, my only reason for being there during the Trump presidency." Now, President Trump's tweet contradicts everything we've been hearing from the State Department, the Pentagon, the so-called experts and the think tanks and the mainstream press. Now, here's what the head of the coalition to defeat ISIS said just on December 11th.
We want to see a resolution to the Syrian civil war through the UN Security Council resolution process. And we also want to see the removal of foreign forces from Syria, particularly the Iranian commanded and proxy forces from Syria. I think it's fair to say Americans will remain on the ground after the physical defeat of the caliphate until we have the pieces in place to ensure that that defeat is enduring.
Now, there are at least 2,000 U.S. troops in Syria, and removing them would be a fulfillment of one of President Trump's campaign promises. Now, Vice President Mike Pence and Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis are meeting in the Pentagon, presumably to discuss this development. A White House press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, released a statement saying the process of returning troops back to the U.S. has actually already begun. The statement also says this doesn't signal the end of the global coalition to defeat ISIS or its campaign. Now, ISIS has been defeated in the sense it doesn't hold any territory, and perhaps President Trump is overstating the U.S. role in that effort. But it was largely defeated. ISIS was largely defeated by the Syrian and Russian militaries, along with the Lebanese group Hezbollah. Now, there are still around 30,000 Islamic State fighters in Syria and Iraq, so there's the possibility for it to come back. Now, this announcement comes as Turkey is threatening an offensive on U.S.-backed forces in northeastern Syria around the city of Manbij. President Erdogan has demanded that these forces withdraw and said that the operation could start at any moment. Now, Turkey is unlikely to attack U.S. forces, so by removing them, the U.S. would be essentially handing northeastern Syria over to Turkey and leaving its Kurdish allies in the dust. Now, it's important to point out that Turkey has actually used local extremist groups as proxies, so by handing this region over to Turkey, the U.S. could even be creating the conditions for the rise of ISIS or similar groups once again in that region. Reporting live in Washington, Dan Cohen, RT. Back to you, Manila.
And joining me now to discuss this major announcement, former Pentagon official Michael Maloof. Mike, so you heard Dan's report there. POTUS says ISIS is done in Syria as the reason to bring back some 2,000 or so soldiers on the ground. The Pentagon is against this. Why the disconnect?
Well, I think that this is an issue between his security people. They don't want the troops out. Certainly Mattis doesn't want the Secretary of Defense does not want them out, nor does John Bolton, his national security advisor. I think it really represents a deal that Trump made with Erdogan, the Turkish president. While U.S. troops may be going out of northeastern Syria, they're still going to be in southeastern portion in Al Tanaf, as far as I can tell. And there's going to be continued training of there, because that's another very central key area, because that's where you have Iraq, Jordan, and Syria all coming together. Yeah. But with the troops out of the eastern portion, it clears the way for the Iranians then to start moving eastward unimpeded in many respects. And so it raises a question of is the president countermanding his what his advisors told him just a few days ago, and does this represent any loss of trust in them? That's an open question. And
as Dan brought up, in the northeast region, where does this leave the Kurds?
Well, they're left holding the bag, and I think they're scrambling, because as to Erdogan does not want Kurds up there. Now, there's a possibility the Kurds may try to work out a deal with Damascus itself, And Erdogan has also stated that he backs Assad. It could mean that Syrian troops may be allowed to move on in. The question is, what will Erdogan do? And that's still open to question.
And during Nikki Haley's tenure as the UN ambassador, we heard a very strong position against Bashar al-Assad. That obviously comes from the top down. It's not something Nikki Haley made up on her own. Now she's on her way out. Do you foresee a shift in America's position against the leadership in Syria?
Well, no, I think Trump still does not want to overthrow Assad, and it looks very, very strongly, and he's hearing from the Russians about this, that Assad is there to stay. It's Bolton and Pompeo who really wanted Assad out, and it looks like that is no longer the case.
Because Trump will overrule that, obviously.
I think so.
and he has previously admonished Obama for the troop withdrawal in Afghanistan back in 2014. You and I have discussed all of this even back then. He said Obama was premature in that decision. What's the difference here?
Well, the question is going to be to what extent the U.S. could bring in support of let's say, private military contractors who might still remain in that area. That is something that hasn't even been discussed.
Right.
And support could come in from air support from neighboring Iraq, because you still have U.S. presence in Iraq. They're going to stay.
Now that you mentioned that, the troops might be coming back home, but talk to me about the presence of the mercenaries and other hired guns that are in the country.
Well, it's that's another big question, because you have generally about 2 to 3 times as many PMCs, or private military contractors, or mercenaries, as you say, to every U.S. soldier that's on the ground there, and nothing has been said about them. Are they going to remain? We need to hear from the White House on that, and from Secretary Mattis. I think that Eric Prince, who ran Blackwater, has really been pushing Trump to do this, to privatize more of the fights, including in Afghanistan. Now, he had troops he had his own forces in Yemen, and they really got their butts kicked.
As always, we're going to have to sit and watch and wait and see with this administration. You never know. All right, thank you so much for your expertise.
Pleasure.
Michael Maloof, thank you so much.
Sure.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.